I didn't move to Pine Hollow for the people. I moved for the land. 27 acres of hilly, sun-drenched soil, rich, dark, and untouched. The old barn needed work, the fencing sagged in places, but I didn't care. I had hands, tools, and time. What I didn't have or want was interference. That's why I bought a property grandfathered outside the authority of the local HOA. Karen Bishop didn't see it that way. She introduced herself the day I moved in. Clipboard in one hand, sparkling water in the other. Her smile was painted on, bright but brittle, like it might crack if she actually meant it. "Welcome to Pine Hollow Estates," she chirped. "I'm Karen, HOA president and neighborhood liaison." "Not part of the HOA," I replied, shouldering a crate from my truck. She blinked. "Oh, technically you are. Your property line touches the community road. That gives you shared visual impact and under our guidelines." "I'm not under your guidelines. The deed's clear." She frowned, then smiled tighter. "Well, still, we expect all residents to uphold a certain standard, especially where visibility is concerned." That was Karen, polite threats wrapped in bylaws and lavender perfume. I kept to myself after that. Built my chicken coop, raised a small greenhouse, repaired the root cellar beneath the barn, an old stone bunker that stayed cool even in the worst heat. Perfect for storing produce and preserves. It was out of sight from the road, but not from Karen's telescope-like scrutiny. She hated everything about my place. My compost bins, my solar panels, my rain barrels. She called them eye pollution. Left me notes, laminated, color-coded, on my gate, reminding me of neighborhood cohesion. Once, she even reported my rooster to animal control for crowing too early. But I didn't budge. I didn't yell, didn't confront. I let her play petty tyrant while I tended my land. Still, I noticed strange things. A sack of potatoes a little lighter than I remembered. A sealed jar of pickles gone from the shelf. At first, I blamed my own memory. Maybe I miscounted. Maybe I moved things and forgot. Farming's tiring work. Then one morning, I found the cellar door open. I stood at the top of the stone steps, blinking against the cool air wafting up from below. The padlock was still there, closed, but dangling, no longer securing the latch. My stomach sank. I descended slowly, boots echoing on the stone. The cellar was dim but orderly. Shelves lined with labeled jars, baskets of root vegetables tucked in corners. Nothing looked destroyed, but several jars were missing. A crate had been opened and half emptied. And there, on the floor, a footprint. Small, narrow, dusty. I didn't need a DNA test to know who it belonged to. I changed the lock that day, reinforced the latch, and installed a motion-activated trail cam hidden in the rafters above the barn door. I told no one. I waited. 3 days later, I passed Karen on the road. She was pruning her manicured roses in white gloves, humming tunelessly. "I heard you're having problems with pests," she called out sweetly. I paused. "What kind of pests?" She snipped a blossom and glanced at me. "Oh, you know, the sort that get into places they shouldn't. Maybe you should keep your property better secured." That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the camera feed, checking every motion ping with the patience of a man baiting a trap. And then on the 5th night, it happened. 1:17 a.m. The feed lit up. A hooded figure crept along the side of the barn, flashlight flickering. She wore gloves, moved with a casual confidence that only comes from practice. I watched her crouch at the root cellar, produce a thin tool, and pop the new lock in under 60 seconds. Then she disappeared into the darkness below. I stared at the screen, anger slow boiling into something harder, heavier. She wasn't just nosy. She was stealing from me. And she had no idea what was coming next. I didn't go in after her. Not yet. I stood in the dark, watching the cellar door she'd slipped into without hesitation. She wasn't afraid. She'd done it before. That casual walk, the confidence in her hands as she picked the lock, it all pointed to a woman who thought the rules didn't apply to her. Or worse, that she made the rules. And maybe, in her little kingdom of Pine Hollow, she did. But my land wasn't her kingdom. I drove back to the house, silent and steady, heart pounding not with panic, but with purpose. I grabbed the thick steel bar I kept in the shed, an old piece of farm equipment I'd once used to brace barn doors during a storm, and slid it into the truck bed. Then I drove back to the cellar, killed the headlights, and got out. No sounds. No lights from below. Just the faint scent of stone and earth drifting up from the cellar mouth. With one hard motion, I slammed the twin doors shut. There was a muffled thud from inside. I dropped the bar across the latches, locking them from the outside. A pause. Then the banging started. "Hey," her voice echoed, tinny and high-pitched through the cellar doors. "Hey, let me out of here." I didn't answer. I sat on an overturned bucket by the barn, pulled out my phone, and opened the live feed. The trail cam had a clear shot of her entering. That was all the proof I needed. "You can't do this," she shrieked. I leaned back against the barn wall, still not answering. Let her panic. Let her sweat. "You're going to regret this," she barked. "This is unlawful detainment." I was checking for health hazards while pocketing my canned peaches. I muttered under my breath. I called the sheriff. Told him everything about the broken locks, the theft, the camera footage, the footprint. The dispatcher on the line was calm, but I could hear the amusement tucked behind her questions. "You say she's currently locked in the cellar?" "Yes." "You sure she's not hurt?" "She's yelling. Loudly." "We'll send someone out." By the time I hung up, Karen had changed tactics. The yelling had stopped. Now her voice came softer, desperate. "Please. I have low blood sugar. I could faint. It's freezing down here. It's 52 degrees year-round." I called out finally. "Great for storing food. Not bad for people, either." "Why are you doing this?" she whimpered. I could ask you the same thing. Another silence. Then, I just wanted to check. You don't have a permit for food storage. That can attract rodents. I keep it cleaner than your HOA clubhouse. And I'm not under your regulations." Her tone snapped back. "We'll see what the court says when I sue you. You broke in. On camera. With stolen goods in hand." She didn't answer that one. 15 minutes later, I heard tires on gravel. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up, followed by a second. 2 deputies got out, calm but alert. One tapped the steel bar. The other looked at me. "She's still inside?" "Yep." He raised an eyebrow. "You lock her in there?" "She broke in. 3rd time this month. I've got footage." "Show me." I handed him my phone. He watched the feed, Karen prying open the lock, slipping inside, casual as a neighbor checking the mail. "Well," he said after a beat, "this might be the easiest arrest I've made all year." They knocked once, loudly. "Karen Bishop, step up to the door." Hands visible. She protested, of course. Yelled something about being a civic officer. One deputy rolled his eyes and slid the bar free. She stumbled out of the cellar, disheveled, hair matted with cellar dust, blouse stained from brushing past a crate of onions. She looked less like a queen and more like a raccoon caught in a crawl space. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. The deputy held up my phone. "We've got the footage. And your HOA privileges don't cover burglary." She froze. Then, as they led her to the cruiser, she whipped her head toward me. "This isn't over," she snarled. I didn't answer. Because she was right. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sheriff's cruiser pulled away with Karen's wailing in the back, but her last words lingered like a bitter aftertaste. "This isn't over." I watched the car disappear down the road, its red and blue lights fading into the distance. A heavy silence settled over the property. The barn stood stoic in the dusk light, the same as it always had been. Yet somehow everything felt different. I couldn't quite shake the feeling that Karen's arrest wasn't the end of things. It wasn't even the beginning. There were too many ways she could retaliate. She didn't strike me as the type to give up easily. In fact, Karen didn't lose. She punished. And I had a sinking feeling that I was about to feel the weight of that punishment. The following morning, I found out just how right I was. I hadn't even finished my breakfast when a letter arrived. I could hear the postman's truck fade into the distance as I opened it. The envelope was stiff, the paper thick, official. Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. I read the letter slowly, letting the words sink in. Apparently, Karen had made her own calls. She'd filed a grievance. Not just against me, but against my property. My entire property, under a rarely invoked clause about non-compliant agricultural storage. According to her, my root cellar wasn't just a storage space. It was a hazardous structure, a breeding ground for vermin, and a blight upon the neighborhood. She'd invoked HOA authority to demand that I remove the cellar immediately. The letter threatened fines, legal action, and potential eviction from the entire Pine Hollow community. I stood there holding the letter, disbelief curling in my stomach like a storm cloud. Karen had gone this far before, but this wasn't just a petty neighborhood squabble. This was war. I dropped the letter onto the kitchen table and walked outside, the letter still heavy in my hand. Pine Hollow was a small community, but it was full of people who wanted their world to be perfect. They were just like Karen, bent on controlling what they couldn't understand, smothering anything that didn't fit their tidy vision of suburban life. They looked at people like me, independent, untamed, and saw a threat. I could already imagine the HOA meeting next month. Karen, standing at the front, rallying everyone against me. Uncompliant, irresponsible, dangerous, she would say. He'll bring down the property values with his backyard farm. I clenched my fists. Karen thought she could push me around with her rules. She thought her petty bureaucracy could break me. She was wrong. I had no intention of rolling over. I wasn't about to let this woman ruin what I had worked for. I spent the next few days preparing for war. The first step was simple. I fortified the root cellar, reinforced it with new locks, bolted the doors shut, and added motion sensors to the perimeter. If Karen thought she could simply show up and take more, she had another thing coming. But Karen wasn't the only battle I needed to prepare for. The HOA had been an ever-present shadow in Pine Hollow, like a ticking clock, and now that clock was about to strike midnight. If Karen could pull this kind of stunt, the other members would follow. They'd join her crusade, whispering about the danger my farm posed to their neat little lives. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I needed backup. That afternoon, I made the call to a lawyer I'd worked with in the past. Michael Jennings wasn't flashy, but he was solid, straightforward, and no-nonsense. He'd handled property disputes before and wasn't afraid of a good fight. When I explained the situation, his voice stayed calm, but I could hear the approval in it. "I've seen cases like this before," he said. "Small-town HOA bullies trying to flex their muscle. I can help you, but we'll need to hit them hard. You'll need to stand firm." That was the plan. Hit them hard, stand firm, and make them regret ever messing with me. The next week, the HOA sent a second letter, a formal complaint about my property, in violation of neighborhood guidelines. They demanded an immediate inspection. They said I was obstructing the visual harmony of Pine Hollow. They threatened more fines. I didn't flinch. Instead, I grabbed my phone, recorded a quick video, and uploaded it to my private channel. In it, I explained everything. Karen's theft, her false accusations, the HOA's constant harassment. I detailed every violation they'd made, every unfair rule they'd enforced. The video ended with one simple message. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I hit send. And then I waited. The video I uploaded didn't just sit idly on my phone. By the end of the evening, it had been shared. Not just within Pine Hollow, but beyond. People who had dealt with Karen's kind of tyranny before, residents from other communities, farmers, and even a few local news stations found it. Comments started flooding in. "You're not alone," one person wrote. "We've all dealt with Karen types. Time to stand up." It was a wave of support I didn't expect, and it gave me the fuel I needed. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone she'd ever silenced. Everyone she thought she could control. And it was about to come to a head. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I knew Karen would show up, eager to make an example of me. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I'd spent the last few days rallying support, gathering statements from people who had been wronged by her in the past. I had evidence, too. Videos of Karen's harassment, the thefts, and even recordings of her threatening messages. All of it went into a file that I handed over to my lawyer. We were ready for battle. But nothing could prepare me for the moment I walked into that HOA meeting. The room was packed, as expected. There were the usual faces, people who kept their lawns neat and their opinions tighter. But there were also unfamiliar ones. Neighbors who'd stayed quiet until now. People who had finally found their voice. Karen was already at the front, her eyes cold and calculating. She wore her usual smug expression, confident that she would crush me in front of everyone. As she spoke, her voice high and self-assured, she painted me as the villain. She called me irresponsible and outsider, who didn't respect the values of Pine Hollow. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I stood up, motioned for silence, and then spoke. I don't need to make excuses for my farm. I don't need to explain why I built a root cellar or why I grow my food here. It's none of your business. I let that hang in the air. The room went still. People were watching. Karen shifted uncomfortably. I've got something far more interesting to share, I continued, pulling out a folder thick with evidence. What Karen doesn't want you to know is that her actions aren't just about bylaws. They're about control and theft. I've got video footage, recorded messages, proof that Karen herself has been stealing from me. A murmur rippled through the room. I played the video. The footage of Karen breaking into my root cellar, picking locks, and pocketing jars of produce. I watched as her face turned crimson, but I didn't let up. I showed them the messages where she'd threatened to have my farm shut down for violations that didn't even exist. The room began to turn. The quiet murmurs grew louder, a low rumble of dissent against Karen. People shifted in their seats, and even a few who had always stayed neutral leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Karen tried to speak over me. That's a lie. This is all fabricated. But the crowd wasn't having it. A woman in the back stood up, voice steady but loud. We've all seen it. You've been harassing him for months. This isn't about rules. It's about you. More voices joined in, some angry, some just tired. They weren't standing with Karen anymore. They were standing with me. I could feel the shift. It was no longer just my battle. It was theirs too. Karen was silent now, her earlier confidence shattered. She fumbled with her notes, but no one was listening. She had no more power here. When it was finally over, the board voted unanimously in my favor. The HOA regulations that Karen had used to harass me were deemed excessive and unreasonable. They agreed to review the guidelines for future complaints, and they issued a formal apology. But even then, I knew this wasn't truly over. Karen wouldn't slink away quietly. She'd regroup, find new ways to get under my skin. But the difference now was that she didn't have the upper hand. As I walked out of the meeting, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my lawyer. They'll back off for now, he said. But I'd keep an eye out. This fight isn't finished. I smiled to myself. No, it wasn't finished. But for the first time, I was ready. Karen had spent months trying to push me out of Pine Hollow. But she didn't realize that the very thing she sought to control, my independence, my farm, was the very thing that had sparked a fire in me. And that fire was just beginning to burn. I wasn't going anywhere. And neither was the fight.